The office had never been so quiet. Not after a merger. Not after layoffs. Not even after the funeral of a beloved founder. Yet here it was. Hallways where whispers used to run wild, now muted as though the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets too heavy to repeat. Eleanor Pierce sat alone in her corner office, blinds drawn against the city skyline she had once ruled with unwavering certainty. Her desk was neat, the leather chair still carrying the curve of her back, but something had shifted. The room felt smaller, emptier. On the table near her hand sat a single coffee cup, half drained, its rim marked with the faint trace of her lipstick. Across from her, the second cup remained untouched, cold now, abandoned by the one who had left it behind. His absence filled the room louder than any voice could. Jacob Anderson, just 24, barely a shadow against her 70 years of legacy. Yet somehow he had unsettled everything. Not with scandal, not exactly, but with the kind of closeness people could never quite explain. The board demanded answers. The staff exchanged glances in hallways. The company she had built with a lifetime of choices now felt fragile, like glass carried too far on trembling hands. Eleanor looked at the untouched cup again. In its silence, it seemed to ask the questions no one dared to voice. How had it come to this? What had begun so simply, so quietly, grown into something that shook an entire building, an entire culture to its core? She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let the stillness press against her chest, let the memories rise without resistance. The sound of Jacob's voice, the way he listened, the questions he asked that others never thought to. The memory lingered like a song unfinished. And so, with the hush of the office still heavy around her, Eleanor's thoughts carried her back. Not urgently, not desperately, but gently, to the moment it began, to the day Jacob Anderson first walked into her company, and unknowingly, into her life. Before the whispers, before the shock, there had only been Eleanor Pierce and the world she had built. For nearly 5 decades, she had carried the company on her shoulders. What had begun in a cramped office with a handful of restless minds was now a tower of glass and steel, rising over the city like a monument to her resolve. At 70 years old, Eleanor was still sharp, still commanding. Her voice could cut through a boardroom like winter wind, cold but clear. Younger executives often lowered their eyes in her presence, not out of fear exactly, but from the weight of respect she carried. Yet behind the accolades and the polished speeches lay something less visible. Nights stretched longer now. Success, once intoxicating, felt thinner with each passing year. Her calendar overflowed with meetings, but her evenings were hollow. Even the photographs on her office walls, awards, magazine covers, framed handshakes, had begun to feel like echoes of another life. She had never married. Once, long ago, she thought she might. But the company always demanded more. Promises were broken, phone calls missed, holidays spent at her desk. The empire she created came at the cost of family, of tenderness, of the soft laughter she sometimes overheard in the lives of others. Still, Eleanor pressed on. She told herself she had chosen this path. She had earned every scar and every victory. And yet, when she allowed herself honesty, she sometimes wondered what it had all been for. It was in this restless twilight of her career, when the years behind her stretched longer than the road ahead, that Jacob Anderson appeared. A young man with little more than a pressed shirt, a worn briefcase, and eyes that seemed to hold questions no one else bothered to ask. At first, she noticed him the way she noticed all new hires, curiously, distantly. But there was something in his manner, a kind of quiet steadiness that caught her attention. He didn't flinch when she spoke. He didn't stumble over titles or offer flattery. He simply listened, and when he spoke, his words held an earnestness she hadn't heard in years. She had no way of knowing then what weight those conversations would one day carry. But the first time Eleanor Pierce looked across a conference table and met Jacob Anderson's gaze, she felt, faintly, fleetingly, that her story wasn't finished after all. Jacob Anderson was not the kind of young man who announced himself with noise. He did not stride through the lobby with a swagger, nor fill the air with easy charm. He entered the company quietly, like someone stepping into a cathedral, aware of the weight of the place and respectful of the silence it carried. At just 24, he carried himself with the tentative confidence of someone still finding his footing in the world. His suit was pressed, though not new. His shoes shined, though a closer look revealed scuffs that told the story of long walks, not chauffeured rides. He was polite, almost disarmingly so, and he listened more than he spoke. The older staff noticed him, but did not linger. New hires came and went, bright faces often dimmed under the fluorescent lights of corporate life. Yet there was something different about Jacob, something steady. When others filled space with chatter, he let silence hold its own. When meetings dragged on, he still paid attention, pen moving across paper in a careful hand. Eleanor Pierce first noticed him during a staff briefing. Not because he sought her attention, he didn't, but because he held it without trying. When she asked a question that left the room uneasy, it was Jacob who spoke. Not with arrogance, not with pretense, but with a clarity that surprised her. His words were simple, almost too simple, yet they landed with the weight of truth. That evening, Eleanor lingered longer than usual in her office. She found herself thinking of him, this young man with his measured tone and steady gaze. She told herself it was professional interest, nothing more. After all, she had built her reputation on recognizing potential where others overlooked it. Still, a thought pressed against the edges of her mind, one she did not voice. Why did his words stay with her when others drifted away so easily? The next morning, she asked her assistant to send Jacob Anderson to her office. No urgency, no explanation, just a request, neatly penciled into her calendar between negotiations with the board and a call with investors. For Jacob, the summons felt like thunder. Few people were ever called directly into Eleanor Pierce's office, and never so soon. He rehearsed answers in his head as he climbed the carpeted stairs, but nothing seemed sufficient. By the time he reached the heavy double doors, his palms were damp, his heart unsettled. Still, he knocked. And when the doors opened, Jacob stepped into the room that would change not only his career, but the quiet balance of Eleanor's world. Jacob Anderson stood just inside the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or wait to be called. The office was larger than any space he had ever entered, its shelves lined with awards and books, its windows opening to the wide city skyline. Yet for all its grandeur, it was the woman at the center who carried the room. Eleanor Pierce sat behind her desk, 70 years old, and still upright with the posture of someone who had weathered storms but refused to bend. Her eyes lifted from a folder, calm yet piercing. She gestured for him to sit, and the silence that followed was long enough to unsteady most men. Jacob shifted slightly in his chair, but he held her gaze. "You're new," she said at last. Her voice was even, controlled, the kind that could fill a boardroom without ever needing to rise. "Yes, ma'am," he answered. "Just a few weeks." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Do you know why I called you here?" Jacob hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "I assume it's about the meeting yesterday. What I said about the client strategy." A small curve touched the edge of Eleanor's mouth, something between approval and curiosity. "Most people don't answer me so directly. They tend to circle around, hoping to guess what I want to hear." "I don't know what you want to hear," Jacob admitted softly. "I only know what I thought." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the sharp edge of surprise. She leaned back, considering him not as a subordinate, but as a presence that unsettled the stillness of her long routine. She began asking questions, not the surface kind, but deeper ones. How did he view the company's direction? What did he notice in the culture? What did he think was missing? Jacob answered carefully, honestly, his words unpolished yet sincere. He spoke not to impress, but because he believed the questions deserved answers. Minutes slipped into an hour. The untouched files on her desk waited silently while the conversation stretched on, winding through strategy and vision, but also through quieter admissions. Jacob spoke of wanting to belong in a world that often felt too polished for him. Eleanor confessed, almost without realizing, that after 70 years of living and building, she sometimes felt the walls of her success closing in. When the meeting ended, she dismissed him with a nod. Nothing outwardly unusual. But as the door closed, Eleanor remained seated, still as stone. She had held countless private meetings over the years. Negotiations, deals, dismissals. None of them lingered in her chest the way this one did. And Jacob Anderson, walking back down the corridor, knew only that something had shifted, though he could not yet name it. It did not take long for others to notice. Offices have a way of carrying whispers, the walls themselves seeming to lean in when something unusual happens. And what could be more unusual than Jacob Anderson being called into Eleanor Pierce's office again and again? At first, the staff dismissed it. A young man sharing a brief word with the CEO could be explained away. An accident of timing, perhaps a question answered. But when the meetings continued, when Jacob's name appeared on her schedule with increasing regularity, The tone of conversation began to change. In the break room, voices lowered as cups clinked against saucers. "Why him?" someone muttered. "She's never shown interest in new hires before." Another shrugged, but the glance they shared lingered too long. In the hallways, glances sharpened. Some were skeptical, others curious, a few openly resentful. It was not just that Jacob had her attention, it was that no one understood why. To them, he was just another recruit, too young, too untested. The idea that Eleanor, 70 years old, a woman of unmatched authority, would spend her private time with him unsettled their sense of order. Jacob felt it too. The weight of eyes when he passed. The way conversations ended the moment he entered a room. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on his work, but the unease pressed in around him. He had never sought this spotlight, never asked for more than a chance to learn. Yet now, his every movement seemed to carry meaning he did not intend. Eleanor remained silent on the matter. She continued to call him in, their conversations stretching into late evenings. To her it was simple. Jacob asked the questions others would not, and in his presence she found a rare stillness, a reminder that the years ahead could still hold discovery. But she knew the world outside her office did not see it that way. One evening, as she walked through the quiet corridors after another long talk, Eleanor caught the tail end of a whisper. Two employees stood by the elevators, their words hushed but sharp. "Do you think," one began, "at her age, with him?" The other replied. Eleanor did not stop. She did not confront them. She simply walked past, her heels echoing on the marble floor, her expression unreadable. Yet inside, something tightened. She had faced gossip before, about her leadership, her choices, even her single life. But this was different. This was about the one connection she had not expected, the one bond she had not sought, but now could not easily release. The rumors were growing roots, and Eleanor Pierce, for the first time in many years, found herself wondering what it would cost to keep meeting Jacob Anderson behind closed doors. The city outside Eleanor Pierce's window glittered with 1,000 lights, each one belonging to someone else's life. From her office on the top floor, she could see the skyline stretch endlessly, but the view did not comfort her the way it once had. Success, for all its brilliance, had begun to feel like distance, a barrier between her and the warmth she no longer reached for. At 70 years old, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had conquered every storm. Yet when the day ended and the corridors emptied, when the meetings and negotiations faded into silence, she was left with a different truth. Her office, grand and orderly, echoed with absence. The coffee cups she and Jacob Anderson had left on the table earlier that day still sat there, one drained, the other only half touched. Loneliness crept in slowly, not as a sudden blow, but as a steady erosion. Eleanor had chosen her path. Long nights instead of dinners with friends, boardrooms instead of holidays with family. She told herself it had been worth it, and in many ways it had. The company bore her name in ways more permanent than any marriage might have. Yet as years pressed on, the victories felt increasingly hollow. It was in this fragile place that Jacob's presence began to matter. He did not know it, perhaps could not know it, but when he sat across from her and listened, really listened, she felt less invisible. He asked questions about strategy, about history, about her thoughts on the future. But beneath those questions lay something deeper, recognition. Still, Eleanor wrestled with herself. What did it mean to depend on these conversations? Why did his voice linger in her mind long after the door closed? She did not want to admit that she looked forward to their meetings, that she found herself rearranging her calendar to make space for him. Late at night, when she returned to her penthouse apartment, she would sit in the stillness and pour herself a glass of wine. The rooms were immaculate, the walls lined with paintings collected over decades, yet nothing could disguise how empty it felt to return to silence after sharing an hour with Jacob. She told herself it was mentorship, nothing more. She had guided many before him, but deep down she knew this was different. With Jacob Anderson, the conversations reached past business. They touched places she had kept guarded for years. Her doubts, her fears, her quiet longing for connection. And it frightened her. Not because she feared him, but because she feared herself. The possibility that in him she had found the one thing she had never allowed, the reminder that even the strongest leaders could feel profoundly alone. Jacob Anderson was not blind to the shifting air around him. What had once been casual glances from colleagues now carried weight. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. The laughter that used to greet him in the break area grew thinner, replaced by sideways looks and unfinished sentences. At first, he tried to dismiss it. Offices were always filled with rumors. He told himself it was nothing more than idle talk. But as the weeks passed, the whispers grew harder to ignore. He began to wonder what people were saying when he wasn't there. Were they questioning his work, his integrity, or something far more personal? The thought unsettled him, because while he knew the truth of his conversations with Eleanor Pierce, he also knew how it must have looked. A young man, barely starting his career, called again and again into the private office of a 70-year-old CEO. It didn't help that Jacob carried his own insecurities. He was proud of the position he had earned, yet he still felt out of place in the glossy world of corporate life. His suit, though respectable, was not as fine as the tailored fabrics around him. His words, though honest, often lacked the polish of his peers. And now, with Eleanor's attention, he felt the ground shift beneath him even further. At home, friends began to notice as well. One evening, over coffee at a corner diner, a college friend leaned across the booth and asked, half joking, "So Jacob, what's really going on with her?" Jacob flushed, his spoon clinking too hard against the cup. "It's not like that," he said quickly. But even as he explained, about mentorship, about strategy, he saw the disbelief in his friend's eyes. The world rarely allowed for a bond between two people of such distance in age, such contrast in place. He returned to his small apartment that night, restless, his thoughts circling. Why did Eleanor choose him? Why not one of the many polished executives who lined the corridors waiting for her attention? What did she see in him that no one else seemed to? And though he would never have admitted it aloud, Jacob feared the answer. If her interest was professional, he could bear it. But if it was personal, even in the gentlest, most innocent sense, what then? What would it mean for his career? For hers? The next morning, as he stood outside her office waiting for the door to open, Jacob felt the weight of those questions pressing down. He still wanted to learn. He still respected her. But for the first time, he was not sure if he wanted to keep walking through that door. The evening stretched longer than usual. Most of the building had gone dark, the hum of elevators fading as employees slipped out into the city night. Only a few offices glowed faintly, scattered lights in a tower that once brimmed with constant movement. Eleanor Pierce's office remained one of them. The blinds were half closed, the air still scented faintly of coffee. Across from her sat Jacob Anderson, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, his tie loosened in a rare show of comfort. The two of them had been speaking for nearly 2 hours, though the time passed as though it belonged to no clock. Their conversation began, as it often did, with business. They reviewed a proposal, debated a strategy, and compared notes on the subtle changes in the industry. But somewhere between the numbers and the forecasts, the words softened. Jacob leaned forward. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Eleanor's pen paused above the page. "Regret what?" he hesitated. "All of this, building the company, giving it everything." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes lowered, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight Jacob had not heard before. "Yes," she admitted. "There are nights when I regret the silence that greets me at home. There are mornings when I wonder what life might have been if I had chosen differently. But then I look at what I've built, and I remind myself, this was the choice I made." Jacob didn't reply at once. He watched her carefully, realizing that beneath the armor of authority was a woman who had lived with sacrifices no one in the office truly understood. Eleanor lifted her gaze and met his eyes. "Why do you ask?" He shifted, uneasy. "Because I don't know yet what I'm choosing, and I wonder if I'll look back someday and regret the same things." The room grew quiet, the city's noise a distant hum beyond the glass. Something unspoken lingered between them, not scandal, not romance, but recognition. Two people, worlds apart in age and position, finding themselves in the same question. What does it mean to live a life worth remembering? Eleanor felt the truth of it settle in her chest. She had mentored many before, but none had reached her in this way. Jacob was not asking for guidance in climbing a ladder. He was asking about life, about meaning, about the weight of time. And in that moment, she understood why she kept calling him back. In the end, it wasn't the whispers that defined what happened. Not the rumors, not the sideways glances, not even the questions from the board. What lingered was something quieter, something harder to name. For Eleanor Pierce, it was the reminder that even after 70 years of building, of sacrificing, of carrying the weight of an empire, connection could still find her in the most unexpected places. And for Jacob Anderson, It was the realization that sometimes the greatest lessons aren't written in manuals or delivered in speeches. They're found in the quiet trust of someone who sees you, not for your age or your status, but for the truth of who you are becoming. The office will remember the shock, but Eleanor and Jacob will remember the silence, the kind of silence that carried meaning far deeper than words. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Eleanor Pierce's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Eleanor Pierce's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.